the Alluring Bead Boutique, and I have recently been working on a series over on my website, on my blog, called Bead Weaving 101, and I've been working through just the basic stitches that are included in the 2019 Bead and Button Bead Stitching Handbook. And when I reached the ladder stitch section, what I was working on today, I discovered that there are a couple of alternative ways that you can do ladder stitch. And what I'd like to do is do a quick little video to show you guys these alternatives to the norm. So what I've got laying here are two different colors of size 8 Delica beads. I have a size 10 beading needle on my thread and some 6-pound black satin fire line. And I went ahead and added a stop bead using a Super Duo I had laying around here on my desk. I already have a video for you guys, a tutorial that shows you how to do ladder stitch using the 1 bead technique and the 2 bead technique. Both of those are the traditional. So let's just look at it really quick how you get started with that, and then I'll show you guys how it differs. So what you would do in normal ladder stitch is you're going to pick up 2 beads and carry them down to the end of your thread. You are going to pass the needle back up the first bead you picked up, pull that through. Then you would position the beads so they sit side by side like this, and you would come down through the second bead. My working thread is here at the top, so I would come down from top to bottom through my second bead, just like that. I'm going to flip this over because I'm so left-handed. So now I'm ready to add another bead, so I would pick up a bead. My thread is now coming out of the bottom of my second bead. So I pick up a third bead and I come down through that second bead from the top to the bottom to form a loop. And that pulls this next bead into position beside the previous bead. Now to get into position to add another bead, I just need to step up through. My working thread is here at the bottom. I go from bottom to top into that third bead. And then you would just carry on from there, repeating those 2 steps until your ladder was the desired length. So in this first alternative method I'm going to show you for creating a strip of ladder stitch, I'm going to use 8 beads for my example. I'm going to go ahead and pick up all the beads at one time. So I'm picking up 8 beads, and I'm going to let those fall down all the way to the stop bead, just like that. Now, I've got the stop bead towards the bottom here, and I'm going to take my needle, and I'm going to pass back up through just those top 2 beads, just like this. And as I pull all the way through, I'm going to carry this the very top bead down beside the second bead, just like that. Then I'm going to take my needle, and I'm going to pass back up through. My thread is at the bottom of this bead. I'm going to go up from bottom to top through the bead beside of it. So that as I work, I'm going to carry these beads beside each other in each additional step. So now to attach the rest of the beads along this ladder, in essence what we're going to be doing is we're going to be folding these beads beside each other, just like that. So my thread is currently exiting from the top of this second silver bead. So I want this bead to come over beside the third bead down the row. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to come from the bottom of that bead. Well, I can just fold it into position, and that'll make it like the top of the bead. So basically what I'm going to do is get my needle in there, pull, and it's a little awkward, but supposedly it's quicker. So once I pull that bead into position, you see it sits right beside the next bead. I'm going to bring another bead down and fold it around. So now my thread is exiting here. I want to pass up through this next bead, just like that. And then I would pull that bead in. And give it a little wiggle so that it sits where it needs to beside the previous beads. To me, that's a little bit of an awkward way to do it. I'm not sure that it's any faster. At least not for me. Doesn't seem to be faster. So like if I want to lay my work down and work, you can see now that my working thread is coming out of this bead. If I drop this bead where it needs to be, then I will come through that bead, just like in that position, and pull my thread. So to me, I don't really see that this alternative is certainly not any faster than doing it the traditional way. Bend this bead around, come up through it. And as you can see, as you work the next bead, the previous bead you just did kind of loosens up, and you have to do a lot of tugging to make sure your beads stay connected together in a nice ladder like that. So let's finish off the row anyhow. So now my working thread is coming out of the top of that silver lined crystal bead. I'm going to bring this one around, try to get it into position. I know which way my needle needs to go through. It's through the bottom, just like that. So I'm constantly having to straighten my work this way. But what you could do is once you finish, you can go back and reinforce. Or you could reinforce now between each stitch. It would probably help to reinforce after each stitch. So what I would mean by that would be, once I position this bead where it needs to be, I would come back down the previous bead, then go back up the bead that I just added. And that would probably make things a little easier. So now we have this cute little ladder, and I have one last bead, so I'll just slide it down. Here's my working thread, so I need to come through that bead from the back side, like that. Pull my thread, then reinforce. By going through the previous bead, my working thread's at the top, so I go through the previous bead from top to bottom. And then step back up through the bead I just added. Alright, so that is one alternative method for doing a quick strip of ladder. Now the second alternative method for making a ladder stitch, in my opinion, will probably go a lot quicker than either the traditional or the one that we did just now, the little fold over technique. So this is a cross sewing technique with 2 needles. I've got 1 needle on each end of my beading thread. I've picked up one of my beads and I've carried it down to around the middle of the thread. And I'm just going to leave it laying there. I'm going to pick up my second bead on this needle, and I'm going to take my other needle and cross through it from the other side. Then I'm going to pull both needles through. I'm going to hold on to my needles and drag that bead down to the previous one before that was sitting down there in the middle of the thread. And there you go, sitting perfectly. So now I need to uncross my thread, and I would just simply pick up my next bead on one needle, put both the other needle through the other side of the bead, and then we would just drag it down. I'll just throw that needle right here and just drag it down into the center, and it just stacks right on top of the previous bead, just like that. I'll show you one more time. So I pick up my next bead with my left needle. I take my right hand needle and I go through the bead from the right side towards the left, and then just pull it into place. And then when you get down to this end, you would just position your bead so that it sits in a line with the other beads. One thing I have noticed here using this method, also the beads tend to slip loose, probably because I'm using these 8/0 delicas and they have a really huge center hole in them. And the 6/0 thread doesn't do much in the way of filling up that hole. So if you have that same issue, you would simply want to reinforce before you moved on. So you could simply reinforce just using one needle. So I'll use my left needle and go. I'm exiting from the top bead here on the left. I'll go through the bead below it from left to right. And then I would just come from right to left through the top bead once again, so that my working thread ends up back where it started from, which is to the left side of the top bead that I just added. So those are two alternative ways of creating a strip of ladder beads to use as a base for your herringbone or brick stitch projects. So the last thing there's a couple other things I want to talk about in regards to ladder stitch. In this instance, I've switched back over to the one needle traditional approach. And as we add each bead, my thread is in position to add a new bead. So I pick up this bead. As I bring my needle, with my working thread currently exiting the bottom, and I bring my needle through that previous bead from top to bottom, what I'm doing is I pull this bead down. Let me pull my thread and I'll show you a little closer actually how this looks. It's actually pulling that bead into position right here. And so in essence, I am creating a thread bridge, a little loop of thread between the top and bottom of the previous bead and my new bead, and then once again between the bottom and the top of my new bead and the previous bead. Then once I'm exiting the bottom of that bead, I just need to step over into position to add another bead. And the last thing I want to go over is how to form your your ladder strip of beads into a circle for creating like tubular herringbone or some, tubular brick stitch, whichever that you might be needing to form a circle for. I'm going to add one more bead so I have an even number, and that my beads are two different colors between my first bead and my last bead. Just makes it easier for me to show you what I'm talking about. So now I have this strip of ladder stitch beads here, and my thread is currently exiting the bottom of the last bead added, and my tail thread is exiting the bottom of the very first bead added. And what I'm talking about is bringing these beads around so that they sit like this and form a circle shape. So now that both threads are exiting from, the bottom of the beadwork, I would simply bring my needle, it's exiting this bead, I'm going to come over and go up from the bottom to the top through the very first bead. And I'm going to pull that through. And that puts a thread bridge at the bottom of my first and last beads on my strip. Then to close the beadwork or complete that stitch, I would need to come back through the last bead from top to bottom and add a thread bridge there so that the beadwork is stabilized and the circle shape is fully closed. Just like that. And then to get into position, normally I would step up through my very first bead one more time to begin my next row, coming out of the first bead instead of the last bead. Just like that. And now in this instance, your working thread and tail thread are exiting opposite sides of the very first bead. And that is it, folks. That is just what I wanted to come in and do a quick little video and show you guys a couple alternative ways that you can do ladder stitch when you're bead weaving. All right. Thanks for watching. If you are new to this stitch and you haven't learned the traditional method for doing 1 bead and 2 bead ladder stitch, you can click the link in the above this video, and when the eye is up there, and it'll take you over to a blog post where both videos will be written out into a post there, or you can, I'll also throw a link to the ladder stitch basics video here on YouTube. All right, guys, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day.